Hello, everyone. This is Devin Someck, founder of Living New York, a New York City-based residential brokerage. And today we'll be discussing the state of the rental market. And joining me are three highly accomplished industry experts. First off, Kevin Volz, Senior Director of Real Estate at Greystar, a global leader in owning, operating, and developing rental housing with a very strong presence in the New York City market. Also with us is Noah Rosenblatt, founder of UrbanDigs, a trusted resource in providing real-time market analytics and data, which help cut through all the noise to understand what's really happening in New York. And finally, Bob Schmidt, managing director and co-founder of the Guarantors, an established fintech company providing innovative insurance solutions for tenants with a strong footprint in New York City. So thank you for all the panelists today to join. With that, I'm excited to talk about the rental market today because although it may not capture the same Hollywood attention as the sales market, New York City is mainly a renter-centric market. I feel it's also one of the best gauges of overall strength in New York City's real estate market since rentals account for about 75% of apartments, and that market reacts more quickly to demand changing than the sales market. But with the coronavirus pandemic, we're experiencing a rental market like we've never seen before. The number of empty apartments in Manhattan has nearly tripled compared with last year, the largest ever recorded since data being recorded 14 years ago. Owners, brokers, renters, and lenders are all trying to grasp what's happening and how to react. With that in mind, let's turn to the experts. Is everybody there?
Yes, we are.
Awesome.
Yes, we are.
Thank you for the introduction.
Absolutely. So with a vacancy rate climbing over 5%, how have you all seen landlords adjust? And do you think they've reacted quickly enough?
Yeah, hi, this is Kevin with Greystar. I can start off the conversation. Yeah, we're seeing majority of our ownership groups really pivot with an occupancy focus, especially in the last 45 to 60 days through really aggressive price decreases and concession programs. And we really saw that assets that were able to get aggressive early during the pandemic are in a little bit better shape today, occupancy wise, and really as they led the market in price drops and concessions and were able to capture the market demand a little bit earlier. So yeah, we feel our ownership groups are definitely been pivoting fast enough and making the right decisions to stabilize occupancy at our assets.
And Kevin, to that point, I mean, you guys represent a huge component of the inventory in the city, especially luxury inventory. Has there been a huge focus on retention rate with the existing tenants and lease renewals?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been really heightened and focused on keeping residents in place, just given the cost of what a new lease is coming in at, especially today. So we were really aggressive on that early on. And even on the onset of the pandemic, we saw some really high renewal retention rates because people didn't really know what to do. So they were really staying in place, not making the decision. But as we got a little bit further into it, as we got into June, July, and certainly August and September, we definitely saw a drop in retention. And we really focused on making sure that wasn't price driven. But the focus really was, these residents leaving the area and leaving New York and either going to the outer suburbs or maybe back throughout the United States.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And our agency has witnessed, a lot of the smaller landlords adjust slower since they haven't been accustomed to paying concessions historically, as much so as the larger owners. As well as owners that are based outside of the city or live outside of the city since they weren't able to experience or witness what was really happening here day to day. So now shifting to the kind of the numbers and maybe, Noah's best suited for this. What percentage are you seeing, prices fall? What type of concessions are being offered? And are the renters really responding to them?
Hey, Devin. First off, thanks for having me. Noah Rosenblatt with UrbanDigs here. And, Kevin, really, I agree with a lot with what he's saying. I asked my team to break down the numbers. And, when I was looking at the trends, the rental market was in a good place before this whole thing hit. It looked like prices were rising. So it's an interesting thing when you look at when that threshold was, when prices really started to drop. And Kevin mentioned, as we got into May, June, and July into September, and now October, and that's exactly what the charts are telling me. So just, before I get into the numbers, I will let you know that April, it seems like April, they were still kind of hoping for their prices, and they started it in May. So if you think about what happened since, we really had step downs in May, June, July, August, September, and October, into October. And when I look at the median asking rents and the percentage changes, we're at the lows right now of the entire cycle so far. So we haven't kind of found that bottom yet. We haven't normalized, we haven't stabilized, we haven't pivoted and bounced. It's a different game going on in rentals. Now, when I look at the numbers, I think it's important to say since April, because again, prices were kind of rising since April. So you're asking me what the change is. So when I do that, it's mostly down between 20 and 24%, except for Upper Manhattan. So let me just tell you a couple of numbers here. When I broke it down by main neighborhoods, because I wanted to get some granularity to this, when I look downtown, since April, we went from $4,350 to $3,500 median asking rent, down 20%. For Midtown, it's $4,207 to $3,225, down 23%. Upper East, $3,700 down to $2,788. That's down 25%, and that's down the most from the numbers that I have. Upper West, $3,925 to $3,000, down 24%. And then Upper Manhattan went from $2,400 to $2,213. It's down only 8%. So it's interesting when you compare the neighborhoods. Upper Manhattan kind of it's in its own little world right now, and it's doing its own thing, whereas all the other neighborhoods are kind of in the same 20 to 24% down. Over this time, inventory has jumped about 100% or more. And I have studio supply. I'm looking at studio supply. It's up 129% since April. 1-bed supply is up 130%. 2-bed supply is up 120%, and 3+ bed supply is up 175. So I think that echoes with what a lot of people are seeing. Now, in terms of concessions, that is the hard thing to track, right? Because there's no official database that gives us this information. However, anecdotally, when we talk to a lot of people and a lot of sales managers and a lot of companies at rental firms, what I'm hearing is it's between 1 and 4 months, right? Which is not a great answer to you, but it explains the situation right now. It explains the desperation of the landlord in certain situations. If it's just the regular owner and he's not in a rush, you may only get 1 month, you may only get 2 months. I think the majority are about 2 months, quite frankly. So you're getting a discounted price and you're getting 1 or 2 months. Some people are getting 3 or 4 months. Some people are getting other things involved. So it's a wide range on the concessions, definitely up. I just can't tell exactly where it is, other than the meaty part of the curve looks to be like 1 to 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on there, and it's crazy how alarming those figures are. And what we found particularly interesting is some of the creative additional concessions being offered. Everything from gift cards, credit towards moving, free storage, even laundry services. I think a lot of what owners are trying to do and brokers are trying to do is establish, a sense of a call to action, create some degree of a sense of urgency. I think it has worked, but still hasn't created nearly enough demand needed to satisfy the supply.
Right.
And, you touched upon a lot of the neighborhoods, that are strong and weak. I think, it makes sense for commercial areas like Midtown and Financial District, that are suffering, or those close to schools, to be very challenging. But what about the renter base? Like, what specific renters do you think were hit the hardest, or those that have weathered the storm well?
I mean, the only thing I could tell you is that when I look at the higher end, I see the just like in the sales sector, it looks like the 3+ beds and the 2+ beds are showing more drastic changes than the lower end. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of like what you would expect to see. I'm glad you brought up the commercial point, because that's something I kind of made a note over here. When I think about what areas were hit hardest and stuff like that, it's hard to do on a sub-neighborhood level. So that's why we did it on a main neighborhood level. But you think about those commercial sectors like Midtown and like Financial District, where the commercial rental area is just in a complete different space right now. I mean, residential is also down, but commercial is going through its own hell right now. And that's actually leaking into some of those residential neighborhoods that are in those areas. think about also the fact that number one, we're still in a global viral pandemic. Number two, New York City was a hotspot. Number three, foreigners can't get here. We're still in number four, we're in a work from home mentality. So think about all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, there's a whole different set of deflationary forces that are kind of operating in both the residential rental sector and the commercial residential sector. I think the residential rental sector will obviously bottom and stabilize and recover quicker than the commercial sector will. But there's a whole set of different forces that are operating on these two markets.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I also think that you're also seeing, you know, as far as apartment types, those starter share apartments are also really suffering because those are usually occupied by students or recent grads, many of which have either opted to stay at home or can't find jobs, right? And so
that's a good point. And that's a good point. And just to squeeze something in, I didn't mean to interrupt, but squeeze something in. I just heard from someone who I can't say his name. I actually asked if I could use him and do a podcast with him. He's like, no, I can't talk about this. And he was mentioning the East Village tenement kind of rental sector kind of thing. No one's talking about that kind of sector. They're looking at everything else. And that sector, he was talking about vacancy rates kind of 10 to 15%. And inventory at levels that he hasn't ever in his experience, in his business experience, been 30 plus years, has seen inventory at these levels, and he can't get rid of places. So like, again, there's micro markets. I mean, again, that East Village tenement type of rental sector is undergoing its own thing compared to, again, full service, you know, Upper East Side luxury condos by an owner.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I know you mentioned Upper Manhattan being relatively strong in comparison to other submarkets. But are you seeing, or Kevin, are you guys seeing any unit types that are performing better than others, or, you know, areas that are performing better, you know, close proximity to a park or water, or, you know, a specific unit type that you see is actually performing well?
Yeah, you know, I would say on, you know, neighborhoods that we have seen that have been a little bit more challenging are really areas where you have seen newer development products in the last 4 to 5 years, downtown Brooklyn, Hudson Yards, Williamsburg waterfront. And a lot of that is driven by, you know, the stabilization programs and really just the size of these assets, as well as the demographic. I mean, the demographic was pretty heavy, and we lost a lot of that demographic there. And they're under a stabilization program with the new legislation that came in, you know, June of last year. It really caps what you can do on renewal. So, you know, simply reducing the gross rent and getting more aggressive there could have much more longer effects on those assets, because you're really driven by whatever the rent guidelines board gives you every year, which is, you know, 0% this year. If the market's looking to recover next year or the following year, you're not as quick to be able to recover at the asset. So in those locations, you're seeing the heavier concessions, to Noah's point, 3-4 months, because what they're doing is trying to really keep that gross rent higher, and kind of get through this time with the concession style program. You know, neighborhoods that we have seen help, you know, it is really tough to say. I would say more desirable neighborhoods have seen recovering of occupancy faster with these price reductions. So if you think about Chelsea and Nomad and those locations, you know, the rents in those markets now are at an entry point, which is, you know, much more desirable and attainable for the demographic that really wants to live in those areas. So they're, you know, with the price, you know, being aggressive with price and concession, they're able to pull some of that renter from other submarkets and get a little bit more occupied in their neighborhoods.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very insightful and makes a lot of sense. And, you know, moving from the traditional concession offerings, and aside from lowering pricing, you know, how are you guys seeing, you know, landlords or brokers equip themselves to convert on the little demand in the marketplace? You know, this is probably a good shout out for Bob here and his company, because I'm sure they're very busy right now with their product offering.
Thank you, Devin. For those of you that don't know about the Guarantors, having worked for many years in the real estate space, including TF Cornerstone, solving issues like landlords are dealing with today has been on my mind since the last recession in 2009, when I was handling many of the TF Cornerstone large lease ups. I can give you information from my perspective. The large increase in vacancy rates in is a new territory for New York City landlords, having come out of such a boom and then filling up these units quickly. Having fewer potential renters wanting to rent required a change of thinking. I listened to some of your all vacancy rates. We are accepted in 350,000 apartment units in New York City, many of them the Class A newer properties. When I speak to these property owners, their vacancy rates are 10 to 15% plus, with large numbers are leaving with a limited number of new applicants coming in. We're finding that they're competing for a much smaller renter pool. Since COVID, I can give you my stats. Since we work with many of the international students, our international student applications saw an increase from 2019 during the months of March, April, and May of 43%. Since then, June through September, applications are 39% down year over year. So we're working with a much smaller pool of renter. In addition, when COVID first started, with students attending virtual classes, the locations in and around New York City that they chose to live changed. Jersey City for a while was extremely hot. They were offering concessions, good broker fees, and much lower prices. So a lot of the students decided to move over to Jersey City to save some money, which then created challenges for Long Island City and the Upper West Side. Listen, landlords went through a lot when we're talking about what a landlord's dealing with. At first, when COVID hit, we all forget that they spent at least a month, and I'm sure Kevin knows this, just trying to make sure that their properties and their employees and the tenants are safe. After that, they had to deal with lease breaks, no-shows for apartments that they were renting, and delinquent rents. Ultimately, then they finally focused on trying to retain their tenants. And at that point, the vacancy rates had creeped up quite a bit, putting themselves behind the eight ball.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, I think that not just the traditional apartment turnovers that have been increasing the supply in the market. We've witnessed something that we've never witnessed before, the volume of lease breaks and sales listings reverting to rentals, which in many instances are undercutting the traditional landlords, since these tenants are individual unit owners, tend to be more flexible with their pricing and offerings. So it's been a new challenge that we've never seen before. And with that, are there other challenges that you've seen that you've been experiencing now that you haven't before, or ones that are hyper sensitized now to either the market, the rental process in general?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's talk about who the renter is and the strength of the renter. So we have less renters now renting in New York City. We're missing probably 50% of the international students that aren't here right now. And those that are US based who do have credit scores, our stats are telling us that we saw credit scores drop on an average from 697 in March. Now, these are the renters who are not qualifying for an apartment. I always have to talk about, I am the hard to approve renters that I reference. So their scores dropped from 697 in March to a score of 671 in October. That's a decrease of 4%. So you now have 4% of the renters have even more trouble trying to qualify for an apartment. Some of the things that we have done, we lowered our minimum credit scores to be able to underwrite the tenants with a lease guarantee from 630 to 550. That helped a lot. We're also getting ready to roll out our level credit program that can, in some instances, increase a potential renter's score between 10 to 50 points. What we do is we start to log in all the future rent and utilities will now be reported to credit agencies, and they can also do a look back up to 6 months where we can now count the rent that they paid the 6 months prior and the utility bills to get their credit score up. Yeah. I'm also finding landlords are now becoming much more flexible with their lease terms. We're running into a lot more 6 month plus leases versus 1 year leases, because folks, especially if it's students, they can't commit maybe more to 6 months at that point. So the landlords are getting a lot more flexible.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to be, right. We to your point, we've seen this and experienced the same thing with the renter qualification standpoint, maybe being softer than they have been traditionally, and owners having to kind of bend and be more nimble with their standards in some cases. I know we've onboarded a tremendous amount of buildings across our landlord portfolios that we represent through you guys, because, maybe in the past they were not open to or not needing additional services to insure their tenants. But now we're seeing it more and more common, which is something that I know my agents have never seen before.
Yeah, and now a product like ours is now entered into a more mature stage where we now, number one, we've created a product for the landlords that will replace a cash security deposit with deposit insurance that covers the landlord for up to 2 months on all their approved renters, while lowering the cost to move into an apartment for a renter who is now a little bit tighter on money. In addition, we spend a lot of time with upper management discussing with them what type of coverage they want to provide, because they now have flexibility to choose the amount of coverage that they want depending on their risk level. So they're kind of walking a balancing act of trying to cover themselves without turning a renter off to some fees they have to pay to get into the apartment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. You guys have definitely adjusted and adapted quickly. And I know a lot of clients have really taken a liking and needing of your service. So that's awesome. And to end with some upside here, what do you all think are the biggest factors needed to stabilize and bring, the renter base back to New York and get things back to a sustainable level for most of these owners?
Well, I guess I'll jump in. This is Bob again. To bring renters back, to me, the leasing experience must be an extremely easy process. Virtual tours must be used to secure out-of-town renters. I think that's becoming extremely important, having so that they can have a virtual tour of every single apartment that comes on the market. In addition, obviously for us, those that don't qualify must be able to secure a rental lease guarantee anywhere in the world. So if they're still over in Europe or Asia and they want to rent an apartment, they use the virtual tour, they look at it, they apply, get approved by us anywhere in the world. We offer the security deposits to reduce their cost to move in. I do believe that you need, number one, you need universities to be demanding students come in at least part-time to in-person showings. You need companies to start to have workers come into their office. I give you an example. We're located at 7 World Trade Center, where there's 5,000 regular employees prior to COVID that came in every day to that office building. Today, they're on an average only 100 people that come into the building every day. So you got to get those numbers up where there's about 2,000, 2,500 people working in that building every day. And once rents are considered a bargain, which we're getting close to that point, at this point, people living outside New York City will start to want to come back.
Yeah, I don't think it's just getting people back to the office. I think obviously it's an employment issue, right? The employment rate, I think in August was around 16% compared to, 4% last year. New Yorkers can't pay rent if they don't have jobs. It's a little bit of an improvement. I know prior to August, it was hovering around 20%, but in order to have an opportunity for a healthy rebound.
New York City is a hotspot, and it's 6-7 months into this global viral pandemic where the government ordered a shutdown. I mean, we're not out of the woods yet. And until schools return to normal, until foreign work returns to normal, foreign investors return to normal, until uncertainty comes back, safety, you think about vaccine and therapeutics, this all takes time. You mentioned jobs. This all takes time. But with this situation comes a lot of opportunity. And at some point, the residential rental markets move very fast, right? And you don't know what types of policy changes or what type of events might come that takes us off this bottom path or this sharp decrease that we're seeing. I mean, let's not forget, let's look at the rate of change, right? I like to look at the rate of change of the fall. I'm still waiting for that rate of change to even out and for everything to kind of bottom out and turn the other way, right? So when that happens, it's gonna give a bottom to the sales market as well. And, if you have a couple of policy changes over time, you find yourself into next year, you have a therapeutic that comes in, schools are open, foreigners coming back, you're going to start to see all those deep discounts that were mentioned in today's seminar wither away. It's going to take time, 8 to 12 months, in my opinion, but you're not going to have the opportunities that you're seeing now in some of these sectors. Like on a commercial level, I mean, now's a great time to go renegotiate a lease or get a new lease for a longer term.
In closing, I feel that, in my opinion, that politically and policy-wise, there's also going to need to be a push to revitalize the city to get people to move back. And the city needs to feel safe, feel clean, offer more economic development to attract industries and people than in other states to come back here. But I think that, and I'm confident that New York will be back. It has never left. This is just a blimp, and that, we are here to stay. And I appreciate everyone's time today. It was very informative, and look forward to speaking again in the future.
Thank you, Devin. And that was a fantastic ending. I agree with you 100%. And the policy changes, it's totally in our hands, and it can very fixable situation.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone, and take care.
Thank you, everyone.